In today's class, we'll be looking at endocrinology, introduction to endocrinology. We'll talk about the study of the endocrine system. We'll begin to look at the whole concept of the endocrine system, and we find out that we have to draw this diagram that looks like a human, although not a human, right? Looks like a human, of course, just a prototype. Now, this guy has some of those endocrine glands situated at different areas of the body. So, now, if you have this guy, then we'll talk about the endocrine system. The first thing that comes to mind is, what is an endocrine system? Endocrine systems, they are a group of specialized organs or body tissues that produce chemical substances known as hormone. I take that again. Endocrine system, they are a group of specialized organs or body tissues that produce chemical substance which is known as hormones. Now, we have at the mid of the brain, we have the pituitary gland. We have the pituitary gland. Now, and then in the mid of the brain, just above the pituitary gland, deep in the pituitary gland, above the pituitary gland, we have the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. Now, at the neck region, I will need another pen for that. At the neck region, we have a four-sided thyroid gland. We have what we call the thyroid gland. So here, over here, is the thyroid gland. Now, the four side of the thyroid gland is what we call, the four corners of the thyroid gland is what we call the parathyroid glands. So we can go over here. So we can call this the parathyroid gland. Okay, now I will say that over here is what we call the pancreas or the pancreas. Then over here, this is my pen. Okay, over here is what we call the adrenal gland. All right, so finally we have the position of the gonad. All right, okay, this is what we have as the locations of different sites of the endocrine glands. You understand that the endocrine gland, okay, I love this pen now, endocrine gland is also known as the ductless gland. It's known as the ductless gland. Ductless gland in the sense that it has no connecting duct. It secretes the chemical substances from the site, the location or the endocrine site or location directly into the blood. I take that again. The ductless gland, or it's called ductless gland because it has no connecting duct. It secretes the chemical substances hormone directly into the blood. Of course, what are hormones? The word hormones are chemical substances or organic substances that are produced or secreted in minute quantities at the endocrine glands, and they are transported to sites where they exert their functions. All right, so the endocrine gland, another gland we have in the body, these properly secrete hormones. So, and we're going to talk about hormones in a nutshell. Now, we're talking about the next gland that we have is exocrine gland. Now, exocrine gland has a dot. This guy has a dot. All right? Because we're talking about the sweat gland, the salivary gland, and the tear gland. I take that again. This one has a dot, We'll talk about the sweat, the salivary, and the tears, okay, or the lacriminal gland. Now, if you look at these secret hormones, now, this guy is called, it has a dot, which is exocrine gland. It secretes substance that are not hormones. All right. And then we have what we call the endoexocrine gland. Now, the endoexocrine gland, they secrete both hormones and other substances. For instance, you talk about the pancreas. The pancreas secretes two things. It secretes hormones, and then it secretes the digestive enzymes. All right, so these are the two major things secreted by the pancreas. And the next thing to note is that we have these neuro secretory cells. We have the neurosecretory cells that secrete the neurohormones. And neuron hormones is also very important substance. Anyway, now let's get back to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, let me start from over here. The pituitary gland is also called the master gland. So this is called the master gland. But wait a little. Why is it called the master gland? Because it controls other glands, other hormonal glands. Of course, the hypothalamus, which is actually higher than that of the pituitary gland, because the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland. And when we get to the hypothalamus, you'll find out that the hypothalamus is the link between the nervous coordination and the endocrine coordination, or the endocrine system. Nervous system, endocrine system is linked together by the pituitary gland. Now we have the hypothalamus. Now the pituitary gland is divided into two regions, or into two parts. We have the anterior pituitary gland, and we have the posterior. Now, when we talk about the anterior pituitary gland, what is the function of the anterior pituitary gland? The anterior pituitary gland controls and regulates the function of the thyroid. Controls and regulates the functions of the thyroid. Let's use a better pen. It controls, or it regulates the functions of the thyroid. Regulate the thyroid. Now, it regulates the function of the thyroid by producing the thyroid stimulating hormones. So it's going to produce the TSH, which is known as the thyroid stimulating hormones. It also regulates the growth hormones, which is the GH. This is called the growth hormones. Now, it also regulates the gonad hormones by producing gonadotropins. So it regulates the gonad hormones. All right. Now, apart from that, the pituitary gland also, by the help of the hypothalamus, secretes the hormone known as ACTH, which is the adrenocorticotropic hormones. So we have another one here, ACTH, which is known as the adrenocorticotropic hormones. Now, what's the function of this hormone? When the level of the blood sugar is lowered in the blood, hypoglycemia, the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland, posterior end of the pituitary gland, to secrete the ACTH, that is the adrenocorticotrophic hormone, which sends signals to the adrenaline. Okay, for the adrenaline, adrenal cortex particularly, to secrete or to produce the corticosteroid known as the glucocorticosteroid or the cortisol for synthesizing of glucose or sourcing for a glucose from non-carbohydrate source. Now, but we will take it poco, little by little. So what's the function of the thyroid gland? The thyroid gland, which is over here, we're going to get to the function, but understand that the anterior pituitary gland regulate the thyroid gland by producing the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormones. You understand that? Now, the growth hormones, which is the GH, or known as the somatotropin or pituitary, is also being controlled by the anterior part of the pituitary gland. Also, the anterior part of the pituitary gland secretes hormones known as ACTH and the adrenocorticotrophic hormone. I think there's a space here. Let me put another one. Another hormone secreted here is the endorphins. All right, these endorphins are helpful to reduce pain. All right, they help in reducing pain. Another hormone secreted here is the prolactin. Now, what's the function of the prolactin? It helps in the production of breast milk. All right. Now, but the posterior end of the pituitary gland secretes hormones like the ADH, which is the antidiuretics hormone. Antidiuretics hormone, which is also known as vasopressin. Now, this is the hormone that is secreted at the posterior end of the pituitary gland. Another hormone secreted here at the posterior end of pituitary gland is the oxytocin, which is used or which help for the contraction of the uterus during childbirth. Meanwhile, the antidiuretics hormone regulates the production of urine in the body. Now, if you are frequently urinating, which is a condition known as diabetic mellitus, it is because the antidiuretics hormone is not sufficiently enough produced or is being resisted by the body. All right, now we go to the thyroid gland. So let's pick up our duster and let's deal with the thyroid gland. Now, the hypothalamus before the thyroid. So we have the next thing there. Hypothalamus is below the thalamus and above the pituitary gland. I take that again. Hypothalamus is below the thalamus and above the pituitary gland. The location. Well, the location of the pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain. The base of the brain. That's the location. Okay, that's the location. But the location of the thalamus is below the thalamus, hypothalamus, and above the pituitary gland. All right. Now, what's the work of the hypothalamus? I told you it's going to link. Hypothalamus links the endocrine gland or the endocrine system to the nervous coordination or the nervous system. All right. Now, it also controls sleep and alertness. The hypothalamus controls sleep, and of course, to control sleep, it also controls being alert. It controls thirst. Your ability to be thirsty or thirsty is controlled by the hypothalamus. It controls the temperature and the temperament. It controls your temperature and your temperament. All right, so this is what the hypothalamus does. And also it's a coordinator. It coordinates the pituitary gland. You need to write that with a red ink. It's a coordinator. So we put that there as a coordinator. All right, it's a coordinator. It coordinates the pituitary gland. Now, having said that, we move to the thyroid gland. What's the function of the thyroid gland? I think I should take off from here. Now, the thyroid gland, let's write that on the board. The thyroid gland, by the help of the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormones, produce an hormone known as thyroxine. So there is a thyroxine produced here. So thyroxine is produced, and 3-iodothyroxine. Now this is known as T4. This is known as T3. All right, this is known as T4 hormones. That guy is called T3 hormone, 3-iodothyroxine. Now, what's the function of these hormones? Well, these two hormones help in development of the brain of a little child, okay, and also in regulation of body metabolism. All right. Now, it also produces an hormone known as calcitonin. All right. What's the function of calcitonin? We'll know that in a nutshell. So circle out calcitonin. So we're going to know the function in a nutshell. Let's go to the parathyroid hormone. What's the function or what's the work of the parathyroid? All right. All right. This parathyroid produce the parathyroid hormone. Okay, produce the parathyroid hormone. Now, if you look at that, what this hormone is doing is that it's going to increase or it help regulation of the calcium content that is in the bloodstream. So we have the calcium content here. Now, meanwhile, this calcitonin counteracts the production of calcium content in the blood, which means this increase the calcium content in your blood, while calcitonin reduce the calcium content that is in the blood. All right. Now we're going to go to the pancreas. I love the pancreas. Now I love the pancreas because it works both, it produces both hormones and both enzymes. So we're going to use two sides. Let's use a whole board for that because we need a space for that. For the pancreas, let's start with the hormonal function of the pancreas. Understand that the pancreas is also called the endocrine gland. Why? It produces that is endocrine. It produces enzo, that is substances that are not endocrine, which are digestive enzymes. So we go to the pancreas. So, or pancreas, any of those. Now, for the pancreas now, we're going to start, it is also an endoexocrine. All right, endoexocrine. All right, now let's go to the endo, that is the hormonal part of, production of hormone part of the pancreas. There is something called the group of, it's called the islet, the group of islets. Now, this islet, okay, produces the hormone insulin. And then glucagon. If you go deeper, insulin is produced by the B cells, while glucagon is produced by the A cells. But this is just an introduction. We will get deeper with time. All right? So let's keep it at introductory level. All right, now, the insulin converts glucose to glycogen. Then the glucagon converts glycogen back to glucose. All right, if you want to see the carbohydrate metabolism, you want to check out the carbohydrate metabolism, we have a video on that. All right, so just know that insulin converts glucose to glycogen, and then glucagon converts glycogen back to glucose. Then, if you want a detail on both the processes that is involved, glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, and gluconeogenesis, we have a video on carbohydrate metabolism. You can check out that video for that insight. All right. Now, we just write carbohydrate metabolism by Nehemiah. You'll find it there. All right. We have the enzyme function of this. For the enzyme, it produces the digestive enzymes. The digestive enzyme produced is the amylase, the lipase, and the proteases. The proteases is the pepsin, the trypsin, and the chymotrypsin. This works on starch, break down starch. This breaks down fat, okay, or fatty substances, all right? This works on protein. All right, so that works on protein. All right, by the way, this is just an extra information. We're talking about the endocrine system, not the digestive juice, because this thing is called pancreatic juice. They are known as pancreatic juice. So you can see that the pancreas works as an endocrine gland by producing insulin and digestive enzyme known as the pancreatic juice. All right, so we're going to go to the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland, what's happening here? The adrenal gland has two parts, the outer part and the inner part. The outer part is known as the adrenal cortex. So we have over here adrenal cortex. Now, what's the function of the adrenal cortex? The adrenal cortex, which is the outer part, remember, outer part. Now, the adrenal cortex receiving signal when there is hypoglycemia, low level of sugar in the blood, from the of course, hypothalamus start of the reaction. Then the pituitary gland send the ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone, to the outer cortex, which is the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex receives this hormone, which induces to produce the corticosteroid. Before the corticosteroid, it will produce the glucocorticosteroid. Now, this corticosteroid is gotten from the glucocorticosteroid. Now, because the corticosteroid that we are referring to here is actually the cortisols. Now, this cortisol can also be called the hydrocortisol. I make a space for myself. All right, so having said that, you will not find out that the function of this cortisol or hydrocortisol, or in general corticosteroid produced in the adrenal gland, it sends signals to the fatty acid, to the fatty substances in the body, and then amino acid and glycerol is now being converted to become the glucose source. In fact, amino acid and then glycerol is converted by certain enzymes in the liver to glucose, while fatty acid is broken down to acetyl coenzyme A, which is used for our Krebs cycle. All right. Now, I will say that finally we go to the gonads. What's happening in the gonads? Now, for the gonads, the gonads is the position for the female and the male sex hormones. The gonads are responsible for the production and the maturity of the female and the male sex cells, or the germ, sex, J-E-R-M, right? Now, these gonads for the male is found at the testicles. So we have the testes. Remember, testes, which is the two testes. If it's higher, it becomes one of the testicles. So testes, that's the two testicles. Now, it produces testosterone. It produces testosterone. Yeah, testosterone. Now, we have the female gonad position, which is the ovaries. Now, these ovary produce estrogen and progesterone. All right. Now, what's the function of the testosterone? I'm going to give you, just write it down if you're writing. Testosterone, it's involved in secondary and sexual maturity. You understand that testosterone is the hormone that's responsible for development in puberty. Throughout your old age, you still find testosterone working. Now, the testosterone over here helps in the production of air in the armpit and then in some pubic area. You understand what I'm trying to say? That's the work of the testosterone. And the deepness of the voice, that's the work of the testosterone. The testosterone activates your puberty. All right. Now, you talk about the estrogen. You need to pay attention to that. Now, for the estrogen is involved in the first phase of the menstrual cycle, which is known as the follicular phase. Then progesterone, if implantation did not happen at the uterus, progesterone will now continue the second phase of the menstrual cycle, which is known as the luteal phase. Now, but if there is implantation, the progesterone will help for the implantation because it's known as the pregnancy hormone. And the progesterone also helps for the formation of the placenta in the uterus of the mother of the fetus. Now, if you're looking at that, you look at progesterone as the pregnancy hormone, and estrogen is the one involved for the development of the breast, for the enlargement of the hips, for some kind of also the enlargement of the vagina, the hip, the breast, and a lot of those, even the enlargement of the uterus. So you see that all these hormones are important in your body. So this is the introduction to endocrinology. And then in a subsequent video, we would like you to also, you need us to treat our concept under endocrinology. You can drop that in the comment section. We will attend to you. If you have any question on this, or you have something to say to this, or